Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a joint review of Country Dance, a 1932 novel by Margiad Evans, a Welsh novel, but it's complicated. Margiad Evans is the pen name for, what's her name? Peggy Whistler, who was English, but she had a lifelong identification with Welsh culture and Wales. And this is very much a story about the border between Wales and England. It's one of the most compelling novels I read this year. I can't recommend it highly enough. I'm not going to say very much because you're going to hear in a minute from Charlotte of Tired Mama Tries to Read. And she knows this novella inside out and backwards and actually did academic research into it. So the bulk of this video will be her, but I just want to preface it by telling you a few of the reasons you should read it. So let's start with the superficial. They're practically giving this book away on Kindle. It's also on Scribd, which is where I first read it, but I loved it so much that of course I had to order a paper copy, so here's the paper copy. It is very accessible despite wonderful challenges and complications. The challenge that I want to talk about it is this border mystique about the book. So it's the story of Anne Goodman, a young woman torn between the struggle for supremacy in her own mixed blood. In other words, her father is English and her mother is Welsh. So she's mixed. And she and all the other characters keep going back and forth between the borders. And it's confusing. So this is not a spoiler. Charlotte agrees with me that this will actually help you get into the book because it is a destabilizing, wonderful thing about the story. For the most part, except for the people that are going back and forth, or mixed marriages like Anne's parents, all of the Welsh characters in this novel are in England, close to the border. And all of the English characters in this novel are in Wales, close to the border. Like I say, mixed marriages don't count and people go back and forth. But in terms of where people are planted in this story, they're on the opposite side of the border to their nationality. So that is fascinating. This is a novel about borders. It's about the borders within the psyche, the borders within culture. There's animal borders, there's a gender border. Anne often breaks out of the confines of what it was like to be a woman in 1850. Let's just listen to the first paragraph of section 1. Gabriel gives me this book, telling me to write in it all I do for him to see until we shall be married. And when that will be, I do not know, since I am to leave 12 poplars and look to my mother. Okay, so 12 Poplars is on the Welsh side of the border, and Anne had been staying with some cousins or something, and she comes home to look after her parents, look after her mother, her Welsh mother, on the English side of the border. And she has a fiancé, Gabriel, who's English. So this sets up, what is the purpose of this text? It's for her jealous boyfriend to monitor her. The text and Anne's journal comes to take on a different purpose later in the story, but that is the genesis of the text. And a lot of it is about fidelity, but it's also about gender policing. So there's so much interesting stuff told in a really almost breezy, dramatic, almost mythic way. It's a tragic story about love and identity and borders. That's just about all I want to say. The only last thing I'll say, I'm not going to read the quote, but in the middle of the book, there is a group of Welsh people and a few British people drinking on the Welsh side of the border, and the British guy stands up. I think it's actually Anne's Gabriel who's mentioned here. I won't give his status at that time, read the book, but he gets up and makes a toast to England. And then a Welsh guy stands up, makes a toast to Wales. And one woman, her name is Gwen, you'll get to meet her in the story, but for the purposes of this anecdote, it's not important, but she stands up and toasts the border. So if that sounds good, this is a one-sitting read that you won't easily recover from and that will keep you thinking and make you want to reread it for a long time afterwards. So without further ado, Charlotte's spiel is absolutely wonderful. So sit down, get yourself a cup of, what do they drink in Wales? I don't know. and have some Welsh rabbit and enjoy. Thanks for watching, and here's Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte of Tired Mama Tries to Read, and I'm here to do part of a joint review of Country Dance by Margiad Evans. I have read this book with Shawn of Shawn the Book Maniac and Ange from Beyond the Pages, and I'm so happy that they enjoyed it because I've read this book probably half a dozen times before because it was part of my PhD thesis. A very teeny tiny part, but it was nevertheless quite a crucial part. So I came at it from a perspective of having read it quite a lot of times, looking for quotes, just digging it for material, and this was probably the first time I'd read it from cover to cover just for pleasure, and I found tons of stuff in it that I probably didn't even remember in the slightest because at the time it wasn't useful to me for my arguments that I was making. So I really enjoyed rereading it with them, and they had some really interesting insights. So we've kind of divided up the themes vaguely, and I'm gonna just tell you a little bit about the Library of Wales Press, which is the publishers that is Parthian are the publishers, but the Library of Wales is the series. Just a little smidge to give you an insight, and I'm going to talk about the language within the book as well, and then a little bit about Wales because I live in Wales. I've lived here since I was 4. I'm actually technically English. My mother is from Brighton, which is all the way down in the south of England, and my dad is from Newcastle, so that's all the way in the north of England. You literally couldn't get to 2 parts of England further apart. So I've got an interesting mix going on in my own background, and then I've lived in Wales since I was 4 and I speak Welsh, so I kind of feel Welsh-ish. There's a great quote by a Welsh writer called Glyn Jones, and he says something like, I believe any man can be a Welshman as long as he is willing to accept the consequences. So I feel willing to accept those consequences. So the Library of Wales Press, this is actually book number 5 in the Library of Wales series. There are lots and lots more now. These are some of them in the back cover at the time of this publication. But they're in their 30s now. There's tons of them, and the reason they were brought into press, they were a project that was funded by the Welsh Assembly because loads and loads of classic texts had just disappeared off the face of the earth. They've gone out of print. They've been written by Welsh writers, and I'm guessing every person watching this now from a region of wherever you are in whichever country you're living in, you can appreciate that if something is considered, and I use this in inverted commas, regional, it falls out of the English literary canon. You know, if it's not studied at university, and it's not a bestseller, popular culture kind of classic, it will just go out of print. And what people found, what academics were saying, was there were some amazing literary texts that have been written by Welsh writers going all the way back to the start of the 20th century, and nobody could study them because they just weren't in print anymore, and it was just the odds and ends left. So Library of Wales came along and it reprinted them in these awesome covers. So this is actually it's not a drawing, they're like prints, aren't they, or lithographs. I don't know it's artwork is what I'll call it, but I think it's a lithograph. And these are done by Margiad Evans herself, so they're all the way through the book as well if you get the text copy. In fact, that lithograph is used as the cover to her other book, Turf and Stone, which I'm hoping to read with Shawn and maybe Ange in the new year. So yes, Margiad Evans. Shawn might tell you this, but I'll tell you again. Her real name, her born name, was Peggy Whistler, and she grew up on the Welsh-English border, but she identified more with the Welsh side. So she had the name Margiad Evans made for when she was writing, and I think she kind of went by it quite a lot. She identified as Welsh, very much like myself. And in this book, we've got an excellent story. It's my favourite kind of story because the plot is kind of obvious and it doesn't matter. She makes it obvious. Margiad Evans purposefully says, and she's got this awesome plot, which actually could be a real kind of shock ending, and actually shocks all the way through, but she deliberately feeds it to the reader from pretty much the word go. I mean, you can work it out just based on a lot of the imagery, what is going to happen. It kind of follows almost a Welsh myth type formula. The Mabinogion, which are the Welsh myths, they are often tragic in their endings, and this is pretty obvious from the get-go that this is going to be similar. But the point is that it doesn't matter. What the point of the book is the telling of the story. It's the narrative. You're getting more from this book than the plot, and that is what makes it, to me, an excellent book. It's what always makes a book slightly better for me than any other plot-driven book. So from the start, you start with an amazing little, she calls it an old song. I genuinely don't know whether this is a Welsh song. I think she's made this up. I'm pretty sure, I'm 98% sure. And in the Welsh, it is, Dod dy law on oed yn coelio, dan fy mron a gwyliau mrifo, tig ei glywed os grandewi, sŵn o galon fach yn torri. Which is, place thy hand, unless thou believest me, under my breast, and beware of hurting me. Thou shalt hear, if thou listen, the sound of the little heart breaking. So there's kind of a sense of foreboding right there from the get-go. But it's interesting how she's chosen to write this in Welsh and then with the English translation. All the way through the book, there's Welsh peppering the text. It doesn't inhibit the monoglot reader from understanding. If you don't speak Welsh and you don't Google any of it, you'll be fine. And back in the 1930s, you were kind of stuck with just being able to understand the English, because I think the average English reader wouldn't have had a Welsh dictionary even lying about the place, and they certainly wouldn't have had Google. So it doesn't interrupt your understanding of the text, but it does what a lot of Welsh writers do, where it elevates the text for a Welsh speaker. So it does give it a little bit more if you can understand Welsh. So there are a couple of sort of repeated words which she doesn't explain. So the word cariad is the word for love. You often come across it as the word nghariad because it's mutated at the beginning, purely because you put the word fy, which is my, and then it changes it to nghariad. So fy nghariad is my love. And the main character, Anne, who is a character of mixed blood. She's got a Welsh mother and an English father. She is being romanced by both an English shepherd called Gabriel and her Welsh master called Evan ap Evans. And Evan ap Evans often calls her fy nghariad. So you don't necessarily know, if you don't speak Welsh, that he's using a term of endearment. You have to rely on Gabriel's reaction. Now, Gabriel, even though he's English, he understands what that means. And you have to rely on his reaction to kind of sense that it's some kind of romancing term. So there's little things like that she does, and the reason I'm drawing attention to those differences is that an area of interest for me is how a book written in English can be about Welsh. This is like the age-old thing, there's a lot of Welsh writers who express almost anti-English sentiments, but they're doing it through the vehicle of the English language, which is seems tricky. And she does it awesomely well. She has little tricksy things that she's got up her sleeve. So she does things like, she has, there's a death scene of Anne's mother. That is not a spoiler. It is obvious it's going to happen. Her mother is quite sort of frail, and Anne does a lot of the work. When her mother is dying, her mother, who is Welsh born and bred, but who has ended up taking on an English identity for her English husband, she just loses the ability to speak English. She almost regresses, and she has to go back to her Welsh language in order to communicate that she's dying. So you've got a death scene here where one character is refusing to speak English. How to make the reader understand? Well, Margiad Evans tells you that Mrs. Goodman is speaking Welsh. So then you have a scene where Anne says, "Father is here," I tells her. She grasps my wrists. "Oh, be quick, Anne, dear, be quick, I am dying." So it's in English, it's all in English, but you know from what has been said that is actually happening in Welsh. "At last I tells my father to say, Rwyf yma wrthych ymyl," which means I am here by your side. It's not actually written in correct Welsh, but we'll just ignore that. "He tries word for word after me, and she smiles as best she can." So there you do have a bit of Welsh, and it's not translated. And the character speaking that Welsh is the English character. It's her father who is repeating it word for word so that his wife will understand. I mean, such an interesting way of doing it. She could have just had the mother speaking Welsh and, the explanation of what that means, but she flips it so that the Welsh speaking character is is actually, as we read it, saying things in English but speaking Welsh, and the English character who can't speak Welsh says a sentence in Welsh that we can't understand. That sort of thing is quite common in there. It's not something that drags you along. It's not something that necessarily makes you stop because the narrative is so compelling, but it's there. These little tricks are there so that if you come to do a second reading or a third reading or a fourth or fifth like me, you're getting more and more and more. And it's all building up there. You might not clock it consciously, but it's all building up there to just totally mess up your idea of who is Welsh and who is English and which side of the Welsh border are we on at the minute. She's doing it on purpose. She's trying to muddy the ground in order in some ways to kind of alert you to the fact that it doesn't matter. You know, all these characters think it matters who's Welsh and who's English. Anne thinks that when she's got to choose between Gabriel or choose between Evan ap Evans, that she's got to choose one side of her identity. And Margiad Evans is kind of leading her towards Wales, but she's also kind of saying, look, it doesn't actually matter at the end of the day. There are combinations of the two going on all the time. And language is important in the sense of it's a sign of hierarchy. So at the top, you've got English, which is absolutely the case in 1930s Wales when this book was written. When you think of authors like Dylan Thomas, who is probably our most famous poet, he was brought up by Welsh-speaking parents, but they did not speak Welsh to him, and they did that consciously. They spoke only English to him, and he didn't know any Welsh. He might have known the odd word from his times when he went to Carmarthen to visit his other parts of the family, but generally speaking, he was a monoglot English speaker. That was done in order to ensure that he went further. Welsh was seen as a hindrance to people's potential education and success. So he was, you know, quite literally sort of forbidden from speaking Welsh in order that he would succeed. So comparing his writing and with the writing of Margiad Evans, which was written at roughly the same time, she's deliberately inserting Welsh. She's trying to force the English reader to read a bit of it by quickly inserting it in the narrative. And at the same time, she's making it really clear that to these characters' minds at least, English is up here, Welsh is here, and then other characters are below again. So there's a very short scene with the Gypsies. A group of Gypsies come to, they're pitching up on Evan ap Evans's land. So he comes along and he shouts, "Get off my land or I'll make you." The Gypsies give a murmur amongst themselves. So they're murmuring, they're not even speaking, you know, they're not even saying a language that anyone can understand here. Those that won't work shan't live, shouts the master. One of the women gives a sudden sharp screech. A knife flashes past him and falls at my feet. You know, the Gypsy woman screeches. She's kind of animalistic there. So you've got another hierarchy. You've got English, Welsh, and then you've got whatever language it is the Gypsies are speaking. Below that again, is it Romany? I'm not sure. They're definitely sort of paired with the animals on that one. And I think she does that on purpose. She's showing that there can be contempt held even from the Welsh to other people and other cultures. Nobody's better than anybody else. We've all got it in us to be prejudiced towards somebody. So there's just tons going on. And I'm making it sound complicated, but honestly, what you'll find is that if you do read this book, you'll start and you'll just be compelled to read it probably from cover to cover. It is kind of a one-sitting book. You'll be pushed forward by the romance, by the eeriness of the narrative. And it's only when you get to the end that you're, in the words of Shawn, when he sent me a message and he was like, what have I just read? And it is like that. It's played so many tricks on you all the way through, even with just this very kind of simple love story, really, that even the big plot turns that are kind of dramatic are not as dramatic as what you've been slowly ingesting with the narrative about language, about cultural differences, about borderlands, about race, about identity, about bloodlines. You know, there's all about feminism. There's all of this going on. So, I mean, I could talk forever about this book, but I won't, because I kind of just want you to read it. You won't be disappointed. And I will say that the narrative, because it's meant to be Anne's diaries about how she is sort of fielding her romance with Gabriel. She's initially in a romance with Gabriel, and then she starts to have this, Evan ap Evans starts to meddle and it all goes a bit wrong. the voice of Anne is very different to Margiad Evans' sort of typical narrative voice, but Margiad Evans bookends Anne's diaries with her own little forward and afterward, and you get a sense of what her writing is like in a different way from that. So I'm going to read you a little bit of that because it's beautiful. All old stories, even the authenticated, even the best remembered, are painted in greys and lavenders, dim, faint hues of the past which do no more than whisper of the glory of colour they once possessed. Yet live a while in these remote places where these pale pictures were painted, and something of their first freshness will return to them, if only in the passing of a homestead or the mowing of a field. You will come to know how the dead may hold tenure of lands that were once theirs, and how echoes of their lives that are lost at a distance linger about their doorways. Here among the hills and valleys, the tall trees and swift rivers, the bland pastures and sullen woods, lie long shadows of things that have been. It's really good. She's also got a couple of other books. One of them is The Wooden Doctor, which kind of talks about her health problems that she had. She had epilepsy. And another one is Turf and Stone, which I can't actually remember what it's about, but it's a novella very much similar size to this one. And I've never read Turf or Stone, so I'm really excited to read that. And I'm hopefully going to be reading it with Shawn and maybe Ange. I wasn't sure if she said yes in our last message. So yeah. Actually, you did say yes, I remembered now. So yeah, we'll hopefully be reading that in the new year. So this is Country Dance, Margiad Evans. If you go on the Parthian website, which I'll send Shawn the link because I think he's going to put these videos together. I'll certainly put it in the link on my channel. You can look at this book and see all the other books that Wales has to offer. And I can assure you that they are all classics. They're not like, it's a small publisher publishing just whatever it can get its hands on. These are resurrected classics that are taught in universities, and they're also just really good to read at home. Okay, thank you for watching. Bye.